Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into something a little less comfortable, namely the velvet, fur-lined, duty-ridden world of a medieval king. You're not just wearing a crown tonight, you are the crown. And spoiler alert, it's a lot heavier than it looks. You've just inherited an entire kingdom, and the ink on your royal seal isn't even dry yet, mostly because you still bite your nails. Picture this: stone walls echoing with the weight of history, cold air biting through thick tapestries, and a line of nobles staring at you like you're the only pie left in the pantry. Welcome to the throne, Your Majesty. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hall is packed. Every flickering torch casts 10 shadows, and every nobleman's breath fogs in the cold air. The bishop's voice drones over you, muffled by the velvet weight of the coronation robe digging into your shoulders. You try not to fidget, even though your nose itches and your ankles are numb. A golden crown the size of a dinner plate is slowly being lowered onto your head. You're 15. You're hungry. And somewhere in the crowd, your uncle looks just a little too pleased with himself. There's something surreal about being king this young. One day you're sneaking rolls from the kitchen. The next you're being told you command divine authority over life, death, and whether or not your cousin gets to marry the Duke of Burgundy's daughter. No pressure. The Latin chant reaches its climax. The incense makes your eyes water. Or maybe it's just the overwhelming realization that your dad, the last king, is now cold, buried, and not particularly helpful with advice. You'd ask him what to do about that border skirmish in the west, or the new taxes the merchants are whispering about, or the growing whispers that you're just a boy on a borrowed throne. Instead, you get handed a scepter taller than your forearm, and a sword you'll probably never actually use. You're not even wearing underwear. See, medieval coronation robes were designed for ceremony, not comfort, and they didn't account for the itchy reality of raw wool. Somewhere beneath all the pageantry, you're just a kid wearing heavy metal and trying not to trip on your own ermine-trimmed heat. Here's the strange part. No one seems to care that you're young. Or rather, everyone cares a little too much. Some look at you like you're the kingdom's saviour, the embodiment of centuries of noble blood. Others see you as an opportunity. You hear their voices behind tapestries, behind pews, behind your back. He's too young to lead. He'll need guidance, which is noble speak for I'm going to run things while he figures out how to grow a beard. That's not to say there aren't actual perks. You now own approximately everything. Castles, horses, forests, even the fish in the river technically answer to you. Want to ride into a village and demand a loaf of bread? Boom. Royal prerogative. Want to outlaw pickles? Done. Though, historically, no medieval king did that. Probably because pickles were one of the few things that didn't spoil instantly. One interesting historical note. King Henry VI of England became king at just 9 months old. 9 months. Imagine needing help burping and also commanding a navy. Of course, a regent ruled in his place, but it makes your 15-year-old self feel almost seasoned. You're practically middle-aged compared to him. But here's the kicker. Scholars still argue about how much power teenage kings really had. Some believe young monarchs were nothing more than gilded puppets for ambitious nobles and overzealous clerics. Others insist certain kings, like Richard II, exerted real control early on. You're still figuring out how to hold a goblet without spilling on your doublet. After the ceremony, you're expected to give a speech, which is difficult because your tutor only got halfway through teaching you Latin verbs before he caught the plague. So instead, you stand, smile tightly, and let your Lord Chancellor do the talking. You nod at all the right places. You raise your goblet in salute. You try not to make eye contact with the jester, who is already halfway drunk and juggling sausages. You ride through the city, crowned and cloaked, waving to cheering crowds who mostly want to get a glimpse of your crown. Children run alongside the royal carriage. Women toss flowers. Old men shout blessings. And behind the smiles, you see it. Expectation. Expectation that you'll fix the roads, end the wars, lower the taxes, banish the plague, and somehow also throw a really good feast. And if you don't, well, there's always the threat of rebellion, assassination, or... Funny side note, some medieval kings believed their touch could heal diseases. The royal touch was a whole thing, especially for scrofula, a type of tuberculosis. You haven't even healed from your last skinned knee, but apparently your fingers now carry divine power. No pressure. That night you lie in your royal bed, if you can call it lying. The mattress is lumpy, the canopy creaks, and every time the wind howls, you're pretty sure it's your dead father haunting you. You clutch a stuffed hawk from your childhood and whisper to yourself, "I am king." It doesn't feel real. Not yet. But tomorrow, your advisors will line up with scrolls, plans, and warnings. The nobles will bow, the court will gossip, the people will chant your name in the streets, while also wondering if you'll raise their taxes again. And you'll have to pretend to know what you're doing, because in this world, power isn't just worn, it's performed. Also, note to self, find out what fealty actually means. The first sound you hear is a rooster. The second is the heavy creak of iron hinges as your chamberlain eases open the massive wooden doors to your bedchamber, which, by the way, feels less like a room and more like the inside of a stone refrigerator. The hum of servants already shuffling in with trays of scented water, folded garments, and one unfortunate platter of something that might be pigeon. Good morning, Your Majesty. Hope you slept well, because 47 things are already demanding your attention, and you haven't even reached for your slippers yet. You're tucked beneath 3 layers of woolen blankets, fur throws, and an impressively itchy tapestry that might have doubled as a siege banner in a previous war. Royal beds weren't exactly designed for comfort. The mattress is stuffed with straw, the pillows smell faintly of damp feathers, and the bedposts are carved to intimidate towering Gothic things that seem to loom even taller at night. Somewhere in the distance, bells ring to announce morning prayers, and somewhere even closer, someone is already arguing about grain tariffs in the hallway. You groan softly. You just want 5 more minutes. But that's not how it works when you're king. You can't hit snooze on your monarchy. Your personal attendants are already bustling about like anxious bees. One is airing out your undershirt near the fireplace. Another is laying out your stockings like you're some kind of sentient mannequin. A third has brought your favourite dagger, for reasons unknown, just in case you need to start stabbing before breakfast. As you sit up, a cold gust of wind slices through the stone window slit. You shiver. No glass, remember. Windows back then were just fancy holes in the wall, occasionally covered with oiled parchment, if you were lucky. You wrap a fur cloak around your shoulders and mentally prepare for what you know is coming next, the dreaded ceremonial breakfast. But before that, let's address what you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to dress yourself. Absolutely not. That would be seen as undignified. So you sit there, arms raised slightly, as men twice your age gently pull linen over your head and tie off various sashes, like you're a Christmas goose being prepped for dinner. It takes nearly 20 minutes and 3 grown men to get your tunic, hose, doublet and outer coat into place. You haven't even reached the shoes yet. And yes, shoes are a process. No laces, just buckle straps, leather ties, and one apprentice whose sole job is to make sure your feet don't freeze off before noon. You glance down at the final product, long, pointed shoes known as poulaines. Stylish? Maybe. Practical? Not even close. If you tried running in them, you'd likely trip over your own royalty. Oh, and don't forget the accessories. A belt with a decorative dagger, a velvet robe trimmed with actual squirrel fur, because nothing schemes absolute monarch like rodent fashion, and finally your signet ring, the literal stamp of your authority, which you are never supposed to remove, ever. Some kings were even buried with it on, just to be extra dramatic. It's a ridiculous ensemble, but you can't argue, not because you don't want to, but because your mouth is currently being wiped with a perfumed cloth soaked in rosewater. Hygiene, medieval style. And here's the funny part. Some historians debate whether this kind of morning routine was typical for all kings, or just the over-the-top ones. There's evidence that more hands-on kings preferred simpler garb and less fuss. Then again, If you're not making a grand entrance every time you walk through a door, are you really even ruling? The door opens again. In comes your Lord Steward, carrying a scroll. He bows so low you think he might throw his back out, and begins reading your morning agenda. It's an exhausting list. There's a request from the Bishop of Northbridge about church land rights, a warning about raiders near the coast, a message from your future mother-in-law suggesting you really ought to write her daughter back, and of course, a not-so-subtle reminder that the stonemasons working on your new fortress haven't been paid in 3 weeks. You nod solemnly, which is what kings do when they have no idea how to respond. Also, the steward adds, Your Majesty's court painter is awaiting approval for the official coronation portrait. He requests that Your Majesty hold the pose for no less than 6 hours. You blink slowly. 6 hours. Holding one pose, in velvet, with flies. You contemplate abdication for a moment, but then remember you'd just be thrown into a monastery and made to copy religious texts by candlelight. So no, you're stuck with this. Then comes the worst part of the morning. Audience with your tutors. Just because you're king doesn't mean you get to skip your studies. You're quizzed on Latin, taught the basics of military logistics and, ironically, lectured on humility, all while trying to keep your eyes open. Your philosophy teacher insists that virtue is the true measure of a king. Your war advisor counters that it's victory. Your finance tutor just wants to talk about taxes. You pretend to listen, but you're mostly focused on the fact that you're starving, and that someone outside is loudly arguing about oxen. Your chamberlain finally reappears and announces that breakfast is served. You're escorted to the smaller dining hall, small being a relative term, of course. It still has a vaulted ceiling, stained glass windows, and at least 2 dead boars hanging from iron hooks nearby for ambient. Your breakfast is a curious thing. Bread, cheese, some cured meats, and something that looks suspiciously like eel pie. There's also a jug of weak wine and another of ale, because medieval water wasn't exactly known for its purity. One of the palace dogs curls up under your bench, hoping you'll drop something. But eating isn't simple. You have to wait for the food master to take a bite first, just in case someone slipped poison into your goose liver pâté. This was a real royal position, by the way. Imagine your whole career being based on eat this, and let's hope it's not deadly. Once you get through the meal, barely, you lean back and sigh. Already your head aches. Already you miss the quiet of childhood, when your biggest problem was memorizing saints' names. Now, the entire realm hinges on whether you choose the right lord to promote or right bride to marry. And speaking of choices, some scholars still argue whether early kings truly wielded all the power we imagine. Many were hemmed in by nobles, church leaders, or royal councils. Others, especially in times of war, had near absolute authority. It varied wildly by country and century, but one thing was certain. Being a king was never about ease. It was about appearance. Control the room. Control. You rise slowly from the bench, ignoring the stiffness in your back and the growing weight of responsibility on your shoulders. You glance at the massive stained glass window and see your reflection distorted in the colourful panes, young, overdressed, and quietly terrified. But outwardly, you nod, calm, collected, kingly, because the day's just getting started. There's no dignity in getting dressed when you're royalty, at least, not for you. For the half-dozen servants tasked with wrangling you into your royal attire, however, it's basically a performance art. They move around you with the solemn grace of monks preparing a sacred relic. You stand like a statue, arms awkwardly outstretched, like you're waiting to be wrapped in some very expensive, very confusing fabric burrito. The air in your dressing chamber is thick with the smell of lavender oil, beeswax polish, and just the faintest trace of desperation, mostly from the footman who forgot to warm your leggings by the fire. You shoot him a look. He turns pale. Poor guy probably thinks you're going to have him flayed or exiled or turned into the royal night soil collector. You won't. But you might assign him to stable duty for a week, just for fun. First comes the base layer, a long linen shirt, scratchy and thin. Then the hose, tight, woolen, mildly humiliating. And then the doublet, which is somewhere between a waistcoat and a straitjacket. Add another tunic, the thicker one embroidered with your royal crest, and now you're starting to look less like a person and more like a heraldic pastry. and you're not even halfway done. The fashion of the day is layered, dramatically, excessively. You're not so much dressed as you are encased. Over the tunic goes a fur-lined mantle, heavy enough to count as armour in a light breeze. Your chamberlain cinches a wide leather belt around your waist, from which dangles a ceremonial dagger you're not entirely sure how to use. Not that you need to. You've got guards for that. Still, it makes you feel a little tougher, a little less like a teenager pretending to be important. And speaking of guards, 2 of them stand just outside the dressing room, stoic and silent, as if nothing unusual is happening in here. You wonder if they ever glance at each other when your servant drops your socks, or when your crown gets momentarily stuck on your ears. Probably. Hopefully. Now for the pièce de résistance, your robe. This thing is absurd. It drags along the floor like the tail of a peacock with self-esteemed issues. The hem is lined with ermine, white winter fur from some extremely unlucky rodents, and it swishes dramatically with every movement, as if trying to remind everyone nearby that you are, in fact, extremely wealthy. But here's the kicker. The sleeves are so long and wide, you could probably hide a toddler or a very nervous diplomat inside them. And let's not forget the colour. Deep crimson, dyed with crushed cochineal beetles. Yes, beetles. Thousands of them. That's how important you are. Your clothes are dyed in insect juice. Historical fact: purple and crimson were status symbols, reserved for the elite because of how expensive and rare the dyes were. Only nobles and monarchs could legally wear them in some kingdoms. Sumptuary laws made sure the peasants stayed bland and beige. One of your advisors once quipped that the colour of your robe cost more than a merchant's yearly income. You smiled. He meant it as a compliment. You took it as a budgeting problem. As you stand tall in your full regalia, you catch a reflection in the polished silver mirror on the wall. An extravagance, by the way. Most people just use puddles. Your eyes meet your own. You look like a king. That doesn't mean you feel like one. A few minutes later, 2 pages rush in, bearing what you know is next. Your crown. It sits on a velvet pillow, glinting in the morning light, with rubies the size of raisins and a gold band etched with symbols you don't recognize. Maybe it's Latin. Maybe it's just there to look impressive. Regardless, it's placed gently on your head with the same care usually reserved for sacred relics. Or babies. You immediately feel your neck complain. This thing is heavy. Like, really heavy. You could do neck crunches with it and develop royal traps. You take a step forward and realise you now have to walk like someone balancing a stack of pies at a banquet. Slowly, steadily, and with the constant threat of humiliation if anything tilts. Funny side fact, some scholars still debate whether kings wore their crowns all day, or just for show. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. In major ceremonies, yes. While inspecting the livestock, probably not, unless you are feeling extra dramatic. Anyway, once you're fully armoured in silk and symbolism, the real performance begins. Walking. You descend the stairs to the main corridor, slowly, like your feet are made of lead. Not because you're nervous, but because the train of your robe is so long, it could start a conga line if you weren't careful. 2 servants walk behind you, gently lifting it off the ground so it doesn't collect too many rat droppings. As you pass each archway, staff and guards bow deeply. Some mutter blessings under their breath. Others just nod with the kind of reverence that says, "I'm terrified of you," but also, "Please don't raise taxes again." You nod back, slowly, regally, with the kind of expression that says, "I might order a beheading today, but only if the pigeon pie is late." The funny thing is, the more you play the role, the more people believe it. Your servants don't know you used to cry when the tutor assigned extra scripture verses. Your guards don't know you once fell off a pony and insisted the ground had attacked you. Your nobles don't know you're still not entirely sure where Aquitaine is, or why it's constantly in dispute. And maybe that's the point. Royalty, after all, is part theatre. The clothes, the crown, the rituals, it's all a stage. You're just the lead actor, and the audience expects a flawless performance. By the time you reach the royal chapel for morning mass, you're sweating beneath 4 layers of brocade, velvet and fur. The incense stings your eyes, the Latin drones in your ears, and the bishop looks at you, with all the sincerity of someone who's planning to ask for a favour later. You kneel, you cross yourself, you mutter the prayers you've memorised more from repetition than faith, and while everyone bows and whispers and lights candles, you think about how tight your hose are, and whether anyone would notice if you kicked off your shoes mid. At some point, the bells toll again. The court is waiting. Your people are waiting. History is waiting. And you? You're trying to discreetly adjust your crown without dislocating your spine. You've made it through Mass. You've survived the gauntlet of buckles, belts, brooches, and barely digested blessings. Now it's time for what should be the most straightforward part of your morning. Breakfast. Except, of course, nothing is straightforward when you're a medieval king. The great hall stretches before you like a scene out of a painting. Stone columns, arched ceilings, chandeliers dripping with candle wax, and stained glass that throws slices of jewel-toned light across the rush-covered floor. A low fire crackles in the hearth, but it does little to cut the damp chill in the air. You could wear 4 more layers and still feel like you're breathing soup through a linen napkin. Your seat, let's be honest, your throne, is placed on a dais at the end of a long table flanked by high-backed chairs for your most important guests. Everyone else has to sit at benches or secondary tables further down. Hierarchy is everything, even in eating. You sit, trying not to grunt like a tired horse as the crown settles a little too low on your brow. One of your footmen discreetly nudges it back up. Another refills your goblet. A third adjusts your robe so it drapes just so over the side of the throne, like you're lounging rather than slowly losing feeling in your left leg. Then comes the food. Now in your head you probably imagine something grand, a medieval feast with boars on spits, towers of cheese, and rivers of wine. But this is breakfast, royal style. First, the bread. Dense, chewy, sometimes so hard you suspect it doubles as building material. Then there's porridge, made from barley or oats, sprinkled with what your cook insists are imported spices, and what you strongly suspect is just ground mustard seeds. Add to that a few slices of cold meat, maybe salted fish, and a fielding of Bolden. You grimace politely and pick at a slice of venison. It tastes like old boots and regret. Historical fact time: meat was a staple in royal diets, even at breakfast. While peasants chewed on boiled roots and black bread, kings were often served pork, deer, goose, and sometimes exotic game. The more unusual the animal, the more status it conferred. One French king allegedly served peacock regularly. Of course, even your royal menu has limits. You've had your fill of swan for the month, and let's not even talk about that time someone tried to serve hedgehog stew. Some traditions just don't need reviving. As you chew slowly, trying to decide if your teeth will survive another bite of barley cake, your mind drifts toward the people seated around you. To your left, your Lord Chancellor, a man with more scrolls than facial expressions, is already drafting letters in his head. To your right, your mother, now the Dowager Queen, sips wine and watches everything with the calm detachment of someone who knows she'll outlive half the court. Further down the table, various dukes and barons perform the ancient art of pretending not to stare at you while very much staring at you. They're gauging your mood, judging your posture, whispering about how many bites of eel you take and whether it signifies support for the East River Trade Accord. You take 3 bites, just to keep them guessing. And then there's the music. Oh yes, you didn't think you'd be allowed to eat in peace, did you? A small group of musicians, hired specifically for this meal, begins to play in the corner. Lutes, pipes, maybe a hurdy-gurdy if you're unlucky. The melody is cheerful, almost bouncy. A little too bouncy for this hour, frankly. You shoot them a subtle look. They switch to something more sombre, like a funeral march in slow motion. Much better. Here's a funny thing. Despite the endless display of wealth and formality, breakfast is where the cracks start to show. Sir Alaric, your master of horses, tries to discreetly loosen his belt after his 3rd helping of goose. Lady Berolina from the Eastern Fens loudly complains about the temperature of the wine, as if it's your fault the castle doesn't have central heating. One of the younger pages spills a pitcher of ale down his tunic and immediately looks like he's seen death itself. You almost laugh. Almost but you're still being watched. Even your eating habits are political. If you favour one dish too much, the cook becomes insufferable. If you ignore another, the kitchen steward sulks for days. And if you so much as glance at the foreign envoy's strange platter of pickled eggs, someone will write a letter to their king saying, "He's curious about our cuisine," surely a sign of alliance. And while we're on the subject of food, here's your fringe historical tidbit of the day. In one particularly weird 14th century banquet, a king demanded that all dishes be served in animal-shaped pastry coffins. That's right, pork inside a swan-shaped crust, chicken wrapped in a fox made of dough. Medieval nobles really didn't believe in subtlety. Eventually, you push your plate away. Not because you're full, royal food is more about quantity than pleasure, but because you have the creeping feeling that breakfast has become more performance than sustenance. That's when the petitions begin. Your steward, sensing your reluctance to eat another bite of what might be eel tongue, brings forth a velvet pouch stuffed with parchment scrolls. Petitions from your subjects. Some are reasonable. My neighbour stole my cow. Others are less so. A ghost is haunting my well. One man is asking for permission to marry his brother's widow's cousin, which technically isn't illegal, but also technically makes your brain hurt. You skim them, trying to look thoughtful. You scribble, investigate, on the ghost one, mostly to confuse your scribe. And then, right on cue, the jester appears. He cartwheels into the hall, nearly knocks over a bench, and launches into a poem involving ducks, 2 friars, and a sarcastic metaphor about your last tax policy. The court laughs. You smirk. Honestly, he's not wrong. That tax was a disaster. Historically, jesters weren't just entertainers. They were one of the few people who could openly criticise the king, so long as they made it rhyme. Scholars still debate whether they influenced policy or merely reflected court opinion, but one thing's certain, their survival depended entirely on how well they could make you laugh without making you angry. You decide to spare him, for now. The meal begins to wind down. Nobles dap their mouths with embroidered cloths. The musicians stop playing. The air settles into that strange mix of bloated satisfaction and rising dread, as everyone knows the real work of the day is just beginning. You rise, and the entire table rises with you. It's an awkward, scraping, chair-legged cacophony, followed by a bowing wave of bodies, heads lowered like wheat before the scythe. You walk slowly down the hall, your robe dragging behind you like a comet's tail, the eyes of your court burning into your back. You feel bloated, slightly annoyed and already tired. And it's not even noon. And yet, as you pass through the arched doorway and into the cool stone corridor beyond, one thought crosses your mind. Only 6 more meals like this until dinner. The great hall doors close behind you with a deep, echoing groan, and you're not 5 steps down the corridor before a man with scrolls under one arm and desperation in his eyes appears at your side, like a ghost conjured by bureaucracy. "Your Majesty," he says, breathless. "The nobles have assembled in the petition chamber. Several grievances await your hearing." Of course they do. Because if there's one universal truth in medieval monarchy, it's this. Everyone always wants something, and most of it involves land. You sigh quietly, nod, and allow yourself to be led toward the royal court, a room that somehow manages to feel even colder than the stone corridors. It's less of a court and more of a theatre, dressed in oak panels and legal pretensions. There's a raised dais with a carved wooden throne, not to be confused with the throne, of that one's for coronations and special occasions, and rows of long benches where barons, lords, knights, and the occasional unfortunate clear. This is where you hold audience, where your subjects, both noble and common, line up to grovel, grumble, or gaslight. It's not glamorous, it's not fun, and it definitely smells like someone's boots still have stable muck on them. As you enter, a herald announces you in a booming voice that echoes off the stone like thunder in a wine cellar. Everyone rises. You make your way to the throne, sit carefully, robe flared just right, and raise one royal hand to signal that the proceedings may begin. The first petitioner steps forward. Lord Roderick of the Northern Marches, built like a tree trunk, hair like dried straw, mood purposely indignant. He begins to explain in the slow and circuitous language of nobility how Lord Alwyn from the neighbouring valley allowed his pigs to graze 3 feet across the disputed border during Lent. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. Pigs. It's always pigs, or fences, or accusations of someone's ox looking funny at someone else's daughter. This isn't justice. This is daycare with titles. Still, you nod gravely, listening with the expression you've perfected, somewhere between interested and vaguely disappointed. You summon Alwyn. He denies everything, of course, swears on every saint from Augustine to St. Kevin that no pigs crossed anything, and even if they did, they were blessed pigs and therefore spiritually exempt. You ask your advisor for the old maps. He produces a scroll that looks like it was drawn by a drunken cartographer using a feather dipped in wine. The borders are fuzzy, the legends missing, and there's a mysterious mark labelled Dragon near the river bend. You make a neutral ruling. Pigs may graze jointly in the disputed zone, but any future porcine infringements will result in shared penance in the form of charitable grain. Both lords bow, satisfied in the way only rich men who didn't lose can be. The next in line is a merchant. His wagon was seized by a local knight who claimed he was smuggling Flemish cloth through the hills without paying toll. The merchant swears he paid the toll. The knight swears the merchant was shady and smelled of foreign cheeses. You glance at your treasurer. He shrugs. You rule in favour of the merchant, but order him to donate 1 bolt of cloth to the abbey for good measure. Justice, medieval style, part logic, part vibes, all politics. And it is politics. Every ruling you make sends ripples through the court. Every nod or frown is analysed. If you favour the merchants too often, the nobles grumble. If you side with the nobles too often, the cities threaten to withhold taxes. And if you ignore either, well, congratulations, you've just started a rebellion with a loaf of bread and a stubborn cat. Here's your historical fact for the day. Royal courts were sometimes itinerant. That's right. Kings would travel from place to place, taking their court with them, like a really fancy caravan of judgment and awkward banquets. This kept them close to their subjects and made ruling more dynamic. You, however, are rooted firmly in your stone-walled seat of power, where everything smells slightly of damp wool and roasted mutton. And now comes the wild. A peasant, nervous and wide-eyed, is ushered forward. He's clearly never been this close to you. His hands tremble as he holds out a bundle of parchment, likely dictated to a local scribe, given he can't read. He speaks haltingly, explaining that the local lord has raised rents on the farmland 3 times this year. His crops have failed due to drought. His family is starving. He pleads for royal intervention. There's a pause. Your court goes very still. Nobles shift in their seats. Some mutter. The lord in question narrows his eyes. This is where things get tricky. Technically, lords have near-absolute control over their land, but you're the king. Your word is law. Interfere too often and you make enemies. Refuse too often and you breed unrest. You lean forward and ask the man's name. He chokes it out. Thomas of Elmbrook. Thomas. You say quietly, the land is dry this year. That is God's doing. But hunger should not be. I shall order the reeve to conduct an inquiry. If what you say is true, relief will be sent. The man looks like he might cry. The court looks like it might riot. You signal the guards to escort him out. Some nobles glare, others pretend to be deeply interested in their fingernails. Fringe tidbit? In some cases. Back to court. The session continues for hours. You hear disputes over fishing rights, marriage dowries, stolen sheep, a monk who insulted a baron's horse, and a lady who claims her neighbour is a witch because her cabbage grew too fast. Every case is a web of lies, half-truths, and medieval superstition, and every ruling you make is another brick in the wall of your reputation. Your mind wanders more than once. You think about your hunting trip scheduled for tomorrow, about the bath you haven't taken in a week, about how good it would feel to just leave. But no, you sit, you rule, you perform the role. Because to them, you're not just a man, you're the crown, the final word, the symbol of law and order. Even when your legs are cramping and you suspect the goose sausage from breakfast is staging a rebellion in your stomach, Eventually, the last petition is heard. You rise. The nobles bow. The guards escort the stragglers out. And you're left standing alone in the cold air of the nearly empty chamber, the weight of justice still clinging to your shoulders like your too heavy robe. You sigh. One more royal duty done. 1,000 more to go. You shuffle out of the petition chamber with the grace of someone who just sat through 4 hours of medieval drama without intermission. Your knees ache, your back is stiff, and the crown on your head feels like it's getting heavier by the hour, as if the guilt of every unresolved land dispute is slowly fusing into the gold. You want a break. Something simple. Something quiet. Instead, you get the War Council. A steward meets you at the corridor with that familiar, haunted expression that says, "There's a small fire, and it's shaped like a continent." He whispers in your ear, "The marshland skirmishers returned last night, Your Majesty. The border village of Halbrook was raided, livestock stolen, 3 dead." You don't respond, not outwardly, but inside, you curse every one of your ancestors who thought carving up land with vague boundary stones was a good idea. The war chamber is located in a lower wing of the castle, a square room lined with faded banners, dusty maps, and a scent that can only be described as ancient parchment and sweat. There's a long oak table in the centre, already littered with game pieces and drawn-up plans. No sooner do you enter than 5 men rise and bow. They are your military council, your marshal, your spy master, your quartermaster, your lord of horses, yes, that's a thing, and your cousin Alric, who's only there because his mother insists he need to learn responsibility. He's currently fiddling with a dagger and humming to himself. You sit at the head of the table, resting your palms against the polished wood as the council launches into their ritualistic chaos. The marshal begins. He's grizzled, with a nose like a broken plough and a voice made of gravel. The Halbrook raiders crossed the river by torchlight. We estimate 20 to 30 men, likely from the western frontier, possibly our so-called ally. Possibly, you ask, already bracing for bad news. The spy master leans in, thin, pale, always wearing one too many rings. There's ambiguity. Reports suggest they wore colours of House Kellner, but some accounts mention red sashes, favoured by mercenaries from the lowlands. You raise an eyebrow. So either a rebellious noble house or freelance lunatics? Precisely, he says, somehow smug and apologetic at the same time. Here's your historical fact. Medieval warfare wasn't usually grand cinematic battles. Most of it was skirmishes, raids, siege standoffs, and a lot of standing around in mud. Castles were both fortresses and power symbols, and sometimes entire wars were fought just to control one stony hill surrounded by sheep. You gesture toward the map, where wooden markers have been carefully placed to indicate troops, rivers, and terrain. One particularly ominous piece, painted black, sits right at your border. "We need eyes in Halbrook," you say. "I want confirmation. Who led the raid, what they took, and whether this was sanctioned." The quartermaster clears his throat. "With respect, sire, we're still rebuilding our outpost near the old mill. Our patrols are thin. If we stretch them further..." "They're already stretched," the marshal growls. "Thin as parchment. What we need is a response. A real one. We march to Halbrook, we take back the livestock, and we hang the nearest bandit lord we find. Or, says the spy master, we wait. Let them get cocky. Let them assume we're paralysed. Then send in a smaller force. Quiet. Surgical." You're silent for a moment. Not because you're unsure, but because this is all exhausting. Here's something most people forget. Kings weren't generals by default. You weren't born with a strategy manual in your hand. Sure, some monarchs became brilliant tacticians. Others just nodded while someone else drew arrows on maps. And historians still debate whether rulers like you truly commanded battles or simply rubber-stamped whatever their war councils procured. You lean forward. Prepare 2 letters. One to House Kelnor, demanding a formal account. The second to the Earl of Halbrook. Inform him reinforcements are delayed, but help is coming. Meanwhile, send 2 scouts from the spy master's ranks. No banners, no noise. Everyone around the table stiffens slightly. Not because it's a bad plan, but because it's your plan. You didn't consult. You decided. Good. Let them sit with that. Then, because you can't help yourself, you point to your cousin, Alric. You'll ride with the scouts. The dagger clatters to the floor. Me? He says, voice cracking. Yes. Consider it. Educational. You're not sure whether his face goes pale from fear or excitement. Either way, your council takes it as a signal. Meeting over. They gather scrolls, bow and file out. Except the spymaster, who lingers. Careful, Majesty, he murmurs, too softly for the others to hear. Choosing bold moves before you've learned the pieces. It ends games early. You don't answer. You just stare at the map until he's gone. Fringe historical tidbit. In certain courts, kings played actual chess while discussing military campaigns. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but while pawns fall quickly, kings are useless without them. You eventually rise, the wooden chair creaking beneath your ornate robes, and glance toward the narrow window where sunlight glints off the moat. A single duck floats there, unbothered by borders, disputes, or livestock theft. You envy the duck. There's still more to do. The steward intercepts you in the hallway to inform you that the scribes need your seal on 5 new proclamations. One about road tolls, one about grain storage, one, unfortunately, about banning onion vendors from setting up outside the cathedral again. Apparently last Sunday's sermon was drowned out by a shouting match over tuber territory. You scribble your name and press your ring into wax with robotic efficiency. You don't even read them anymore. You trust your scribes. Sort of. As you walk, you pass the Hall of Heraldry, walls lined with banners, suits of armour, and the glorious tapestry of your own family line. 1,000 years of history, violence, and art stitched together in cotton and blood. You stop to look at it. The newest section features your face. Young, serious, crown a little too big. Some scholars still argue about how accurate medieval portraiture really was. Were the tapestries and paintings flattery or fact? Your own tapestry shows you slaying a boar with one hand. That never happened. You screamed the first time you saw a live boar. Your hunting master still brings it up at feasts. And yet, here it is, woven into memory. You turn away from the threadbare illusion and continue down the corridor. The next meeting is about trade. Yes, war is important, but so is timber, so is wine, so is the fact that the Merchant Guild in the southern port is threatening to strike if the tax on imported flax isn't reduced by half a groat. You drag yourself into the chamber. A new room. A new circle of faces. Everyone wants something. And once again the crown weighs heavy on your brow. Not just with gold, but with the invisible pressure of every decision, every silence, every nod. By the time the sun begins to dip behind the castle towers, you've negotiated tariffs, settled 3 more land disputes, dodged a veiled marriage suggestion from the Duke of Westmere, and been asked whether you might consider pardoning a man who accidentally insulted your wardrobe. You didn't even like the robe that day. You finally excuse yourself and head for the gardens, where the air smells of thyme, earth, and something blessedly not political. You walk among the hedges and flowering vines, pretending, just for a moment, that you're not the one they're all watching, waiting on, manoeuvring around. You find a bench, you sit, and you breathe. A small robin hops across the gravel path in front of you. It doesn't bow. You smile. There's a moment, just one, where it feels like the world finally pauses. The robin flutters off into the hedges, and you let your shoulders sag, just slightly, as if dropping the weight of the crown might be possible, even for a few stolen seconds. But of course, peace is a guest that never stays long in a royal court. Footsteps on gravel snap you back. 2 guards approach, flanking your master of the hunt, who greets you with a bow so dramatic it could be mistaken for a theatrical collapse. He's flushed, excited, and already rambling about hounds, falcons, and perfect weather for a noble ride, which is noble speak for, you need to get out of this castle before you throttle someone. And you agree, So, after yet another robe swap, this one less formal, though still annoyingly ornate, you find yourself saddled on your warhorse, braced for an afternoon of sport. Let's be clear, medieval hunting wasn't just a leisure activity, it was a full-scale production, a show of dominance over nature, a reaffirmation of your right to rule and, perhaps most importantly, a socially acceptable way to gallop through a forest screaming at dogs. Your hunting party is already assembled, a dozen mounted nobles, a train of servants on foot, a cluster of grooms and falconers, and an entire army of hounds barking with anticipation. There are trumpets, there are flags, there is entirely too much fur being worn for a spring afternoon. The plan is simple. You ride out into the royal forest, flush out game. Simple, except for the part where everything tries to kill you. You ride hard, hooves pounding across damp earth, your cloak billowing like a battle standard. The hounds burst ahead, zigzagging through underbrush, howling with purpose. The falconers release a hawk, which soars into the air like it owes you money. And you lean forward, teeth clenched, eyes locked on the tree line. For a brief, shining moment, you feel alive. It's strange, here, surrounded by trees and shouts, and the raw smell of moss and sweat. You actually feel less watched, less judged. The deer doesn't care about your tax policies. The hounds aren't asking for land grants, and the falcon definitely isn't lobbying for clerical exemptions. Here, you're not a king. You're just a man chasing shadows with a sword and a bird. Historical fact, hunting was deeply symbolic in medieval courts. It wasn't just about sport, it was about training. Tracking prey honed military instincts. Choosing which animals to spare or kill echoed your decisions as a ruler. Plus, nobles loved to use hunting as a metaphor. A stag in the woods could represent an enemy. A boar might symbolize rebellion, and a fox, well, that usually meant your cousin Alric had slipped off to avoid chores again. Speaking of Alric, he's here too. Or was. You last saw him trying to vault a log and failing spectacularly. A servant is probably dragging him out of a muddy stream right now. Then, movement. A rustle to your right. A blur of brown fur. A heartbeat pause. And then you're off. Your horse surges forward. Branches claw at your cloak. Your heart slams in your chest. Ahead, a massive stag bounds through the trees, hooves barely touching the ground. You chase, your mind clearing of everything. Councils, politics, even the fact that you're wearing trousers so tight they could qualify as armour. You're gaining. The hounds surge ahead. The wind screams past your ears, and just as your hand grips the short spear from your saddle, you hear twang. An arrow flies past your head. Not from you, not from anyone in your party. It buries itself in a nearby tree with a sharp, vibrating thunk. Too close. Too accurate. Your horse rears slightly. You regain control, heart pounding for entirely new reasons. Behind you, guards shout. One rides to your side immediately, eyes wild. Majesty, are you hurt? You shake your head. No, but find out who fired that. An accident? Maybe. Hunting accidents happened. But you know this forest. You know the men with you. That arrow wasn't loosed by someone drunk or clumsy. That arrow was meant to scare. Or worse. Fringe historical note. Attempted assassinations during hunts were not unheard of. A moving king is a vulnerable king. Open woods, shifting groups, no crowds to witness. Easy to claim mistaken identity when all the witnesses are hounds. Your party regroups. The stag escapes, lucky beast. You abandon the chase and ride back to the castle, guards forming a tighter ring around you now. The mood has shifted. No more laughter, no more playful boasting. Just suspicion. Back at the stables, you dismount slowly, eyes sweeping your attendants. Most look concerned. A few look worried, and one, just one, looks almost disappointed. You don't react. Not yet. Just tuck that away for later. You return to your private chamber, strip off the dust-caked hunting gear, and collapse into a chair by the hearth. A servant brings water, another fetches wine, and a third, still shaking, murmurs something about dinner preparation. You wave them all away. Then you sit in silence. That arrow, it's still in your mind, still whispering possibilities. Was it a warning, a message, a declaration? Or was it just a fluke? Some scholars argue that paranoia was a necessary trait for survival in medieval monarchies. Others suggest it was a symptom of isolation without friendship. You're starting to think it's both. After all, who can you trust when everyone stands to gain from your fall? Even in the forest, you're not free. The door creaks. It's your steward. He bows. "Evening feast, your majesty. Shall I begin seating the court?" You nod slowly, the events of the hunt sinking beneath layers of protocol and performance. "Very well," you murmur. "Let the performance continue." You emerge for the evening feast as the sun begins to bleed behind the towers of your castle, its final light catching in the stained glass windows and setting fire to the coloured panes. The great hall is already buzzing. Torches crackle in their sconces, tables are set with golden goblets, pewter platters, and a frankly unnecessary number of forks. Musicians tune their lutes in the corner, and the kitchen's effort to cover the scent of roasted meat with dried lavender is failing spectacularly. This is courtship hour, not the romantic kind, though that's certainly part of it, but the political dance of glances, gestures, and insinuations. And tonight, that dance centres on you. You take your seat on the raised dais. The room rises and bows in a slow, synchronized wave. The murmurs soften. All eyes land on the king. You give a faint nod, just enough to look regal, not so much that your neck crams under the weight of the crown. Tonight's guest list is a curated mess. Nobles from all corners of the realm, foreign envoys, a few clergy, and of course the ever-growing swarm of unmarried daughters, each dressed like a holy relic wrapped in lace and passive aggression. You already know what this is. Marriage season. A steward leans into your ear and whispers, "The Lady Isolde of Rivenshire has brought a harpsichord piece she composed for your majesty." "Oh, no," you whisper back. He nods solemnly. "It's long." Because of course it is. The feast begins. First comes the bread, fresh this time, thankfully, still steaming from the oven. Then trenches of meat, duck, venison, and a particularly shiny boar's head stuffed with fruit and herbs. Someone went all out with that one. You're not sure if you're supposed to eat it or knight it. Your goblet is filled with wine the colour of garnet. It tastes expensive and slightly too warm, but you drink anyway. It takes the edge off the day, or at least dulls it. Conversation buzzes all around. You pretend to listen to the Duke of Stonebrook explain the intricacies of moat drainage systems, while eyeing the acrobats warming up near the fireplace. You nod at Lady Alina, who's giving you the kind of look that says, "I've already planned the wedding, please catch up." You sip more wine. Then the Lady Isolde stands. Her dress is the kind that probably required 3 attendants and a pulley system to assemble. She smiles, a tightly rehearsed thing, and moves to the harpsichord, like she's been waiting her whole life for this. The room quiets. She begins to play. And it's technically music. Notes are happening, in an order, with pauses. You resist the urge to zone out completely by focusing on the flickering candles, wondering how many wax drips it would take to form a tiny castle sculpture. Halfway through the piece, you sneak a glance at your steward. He gives you a look that says, "I told you so." Historical fact. Feasts were as much about politics as they were about food. Royal courts used them to display wealth, negotiate alliances, and assess potential brides and grooms. Daughters were paraded like prized falcons, and every smile or sidelong glance was dissected afterward like a battle strategy. Fringe tidbit. In one bizarre 14th century banquet, it's rumoured that live birds were baked into pies and then released mid-feast as entertainment. That sounds charming, until you imagine trying to eat while sparrows panic under your table. Finally, Isolde finishes. The room claps, slightly, politely, in that you offer a gracious nod, the royal equivalent of thanks now go away. She beams. Somewhere in the crowd, her father grins like he just captured a duchy. And then, as if summoned by awkward tension, the jester appears. He somersaults through a narrow aisle, somehow dodging a platter of roast swan and a very startled greyhound, before landing in front of your table with a grin and a lute. He launches into a song that rhymes bishop with turnip and abbess with fatness. The court howls with laughter. Even you chuckle. He's tasteless, ridiculous, and entirely necessary. Because in this hall of whispered deals and matrimonial scheming, he's the only one saying what people are actually thinking. That's part of his job. Or maybe all of it. Scholars still argue about how much influence jesters actually had. Some believe they were mere distractions. Others suggest they shaped opinions through satire, comedy as commentary. Either way, you keep him close. He's one of the few people here who doesn't pretend. The feast stretches on. Servants rush back and forth with fresh dishes, candied almonds, custard tarts, something unidentifiable wrapped in fig leaves. The musicians rotate through songs of love, war, and, curiously, a ballad about a drunk goat who becomes a priest. You try not to think too hard about that one. And then, as always, the dancing begins. The nobles rise. Courtiers fan out like a chessboard rearranging itself. A space is cleared in the centre of the hall. A flute begins to trill. Lutes strum softly. And suddenly, you're being approached. Lady Alina, again. She curtsies. Would your majesty honour me with a dance? Your steward steps forward instinctively, but you wave him off. You take her hand. She's careful not to grip too tightly. Her fingers are cold. The dance is slow, measured, ritualized. Each step means something. Eye contact must be held just long enough to be flattering, not too long to be scandalous. When you spin her, she laughs. When you return her to her place, she gives a curtsy so deep she nearly toppled. You thank her, politely, then quickly retreat. You've done your duty. And now, finally, you can slip away. You exit the hall through the side corridor. A servant follows with a torch. The flickering light casts tall shadows against the stone walls. You're full of meat, music, and mild regret. As you pass through the arch into your private antechamber, you breathe freedom for the first time today. Or so you think. Because waiting for you, sitting calmly in one of your chairs, is your mother. She doesn't rise. She just looks at you with that expression, the one that says, "We need to talk, and you're not going to enjoy it." Lady Alina is charming, she says softly. You groan. Please don't. She'd make a good queen. She nearly broke her ankle bowing. She's graceful in spirit. She asked if we still burn heretics. An inquisitive mind. You throw yourself into the nearest chair and rub your temples. Your mother continues, gentle but firm. You need a wife, a queen, someone to bear heirs, to stabilize the court, to keep the nobles from plotting your replacement. You glance at the fire. What if I don't want a chess piece for a spouse? She raises an eyebrow. What you want matters less than what the realm needs. You sit in silence. She doesn't press. She knows the pressure is already doing the work. Eventually she rises, kisses your forehead, and leaves you alone with the crackling fire. You watch the flames dance. The logs shift. Sparks snap and vanish. In the silence, you whisper to yourself, I don't even know what I want. But the kingdom always knows what it wants. And it always asks you to provide it. You wake the next morning to the sound of sloshing water and whispered footsteps. That can only mean one thing. It's bath day, which in the royal schedule comes around slightly more often than a comet, but not by much. In theory, you could demand one every day. In practice, drawing, heating, and carrying enough water to fill a human-sized tub in a castle with no plumbing is a logistical nightmare that makes war planning look simple. Still, your staff is determined. By the time you open your eyes, your bathing servants are already hard at work, howling pails from the kitchens, pouring them into a large wooden tub near the fireplace, and throwing in bundles of dried herbs like they're making noble stew. You sit up groggily. The fire crackles, steam hangs in the air, and the scent of lavender, rosemary, and whatever else they could find in the apothecary's drawer fills the chamber. Honestly, it smells like someone lit a candle in a garden during a thunderstorm. You stretch, your joints crack like a collapsing drawbridge. Today's supposed to be about rest. No court, no council, just a king and his bath. At least, that's the idea. You stand, let your attendants unlace your bedclothes and step into the tub. Slowly, because hot water is a luxury and they've made sure it's just short of boiling. You grit your teeth. You always forget how much this part sucks. Once submerged to your chest, you lean back, eyes closed, and let the warm water do its work. Your muscles sigh. Your brain begins to unfurl like a scroll left in the sun too long. For a moment, you feel, not peaceful exactly, but something close. A servant approaches with a cloth and a bar of something vaguely resembling soap. You know better than to ask what's in it. It's probably tallow and ashes mixed with essences of citrus, which is code for crushed orange peels and wishful thinking. They begin to scrub, gently at first, then with more purpose. You don't protest. You gave up. The concept of used to it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval royalty did bathe, just not as often as modern people might hope. Public bathhouses were common in some parts of Europe, and personal tubs were considered a sign of sophistication. Hot water, herbs and oils were used not just for hygiene, but to display wealth and refinement. That said, most royal households didn't see a daily bath as necessary. Weekly, perhaps. Monthly, appallingly. The truth is, water was unpredictable. Too cold and you risked catching a chill, which could kill you. Too hot and you'd sweat for hours afterward. Also not ideal. And of course there was always the issue of where the water came from and who had to carry it. You might be the one soaking, but someone else had to haul 20 buckets up 3 flights of stairs. You sigh contentedly. And then the knock comes. Of course, you knew this piece was too fragile. One of your guards leans into the doorway and clears his throat. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but Lord Waldron has arrived early. He says he brings urgent news from the western provinces." You open one eye. Is he bleeding? "No, sire." "Is anything on fire?" "Not that he mentioned." You close your eye again. "Then he can wait until I've had my first bath of the month." "Yes, sire." The guard retreats. You lean back again, letting the water reach your chin. But it's too late. The calm is gone. Your mind is already galloping toward possibilities. Waldron wouldn't travel this far on a whim. He's not the dramatic type. If he's here, something's happened. A rebellion? A noble marriage without your consent? Cows with wings? Okay, probably not the last one, but you never rule anything out anymore. Fringe tidbit. There was a period in early medieval Europe where people genuinely believed in beasts like the Babonicon, a bull-like creature that defended itself with explosive dung. It's chronicled in Bestiary, so yeah, if that's not enough to make you question reality, nothing is. Once your skin starts to prune, you decide it's time to return to the land of the overclothed. You rise from the tub, dripping and steaming, while a servant rushes in with warm towels. Another dries your hair. A third stands nearby with your robe. You briefly feel like a human torch being extinguished. Then begins the long, tedious process of dressing again. Today in something lighter. A woolen tunic, embroidered but simple. A pair of boots that don't reach your knees for once. And only one ring. You almost feel unimportant. Then again, it's just a bath day. No need for a crown while you're still damp. You descend into your smaller solar where Waldron waits. He rises and bows deeply. He's older than you by 2 decades. Face like cracked leather, eyes always calculating. He used to be your father's friend. Which means you trust him slightly more than you trust strangers, and but slightly less than you trust your own bathwater. "Majesty," he begins, "I apologize for the early hour." You sit across from him and nod. "The message?" He hesitates. "Not long, but enough." "There's unrest in Pembridge," he says finally. "A local knight, Sir Harlan, has defied your new grain tithe. He's seized shipments meant for the castle and claims the land owes you nothing." You stare at him. Does he have support? A few hundred men, and more coming. The villagers seem to admire him. They say he's fair. You exhale slowly. That's always a bad sign. He nods grimly. "Shall we send soldiers?" You don't answer immediately. Instead, you glance at the hearth, where the fire crackles softly, and wonder how long you can afford to let your realm unravel one fair man at a time. Here's where the scholars like to argue. Was medieval loyalty truly about divine right, or was it bought and bartered like anything else? Some believe a king's power came solely from lineage. Others argue it was always more fragile, built on favours, marriages, fear and food supplies. You're starting to agree with the latter. "Send a rider," you say. "Summon Harlan to court. Make it sound like an invitation." "And if he refuses?" You pause. "Then we'll have to remind him that fairness without loyalty is just another word for rebellion." Waldron bows again. He doesn't smile. He never does. You're left alone. You walk to the window and gaze out over the courtyard, where a few guards spar with wooden swords, and a stable boy chases a loose chicken in wide, panicked circles. This is your kingdom. This is your life. And you haven't even had lunch yet. The evening falls, thick and heavy as a velvet curtain, and you find yourself once again summoned to the great hall. Not for feasting this time, but for entertainment. You're not entirely sure if the invitation is an honour or an attempt to distract you from your mounting headaches and political headaches alike. Tonight, the entertainment is a mix of minstrels, jesters, and a troupe of acrobats, who are apparently highly skilled at juggling knives, but less skilled at not dropping them near your royal feet. The minstrels play their lutes and pipes, weaving tales of knights and dragons, though the dragons tend to be metaphorical, which is a shame, because real fire-breathing beasts would be an improvement on the current gossip. You listen, trying to find a moment's peace in the melody, but your mind wanders back to the morning's council, the hunting arrow, and Sir Harlan's defiance. The jester, seeing your distracted state, decides it's time to intervene. He launches into a skit, impersonating a noble who's just realised his prized horse is actually a donkey. The hall erupts in laughter, but your smile is tight. The humour is sharp. Perhaps. You wonder if the jester's jokes are a mirror, reflecting not just court absurdities, but your own faltering grip on power. Historical fact, jesters often walked a fine line, using humour to speak truths that others dared not voice. In some courts they were trusted confidants, in others, their tongues earned them swift exile. The acrobats perform their final act, a daring leap through a ring of fire. The crowd gasps and cheers. You clap politely, but are more impressed by the careful planning that keeps the fire from spreading to the tapestries. As the night winds down, you retire to your chambers, feeling the weight of the day settle deeper into your bones. You undress with the assistance of your servants, each piece of clothing removed with the same care it was put on. Your robes folded meticulously, your crown placed carefully on its velvet cushion. You lie down on your straw-stuffed mattress, the feather pillows barely soft enough to count as comfort. The room is quiet except for the crackle of the dying fire and the occasional creak of the old castle. Sleep is slow to come. Your mind replays the day's events, the arrow, the petitions, the feast, the entertainment. You wonder if tomorrow will bring more challenges, or if, perhaps, the kingdom will offer you a moment's reprieve. Outside your window, the moon casts pale light over the stone walls. You close your eyes and whisper a wish for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to bear the crown's weight another day. And finally, the kingdom fades away as sleep claims you. You awaken not to the gentle sounds of morning bird song, but to the sharp clatter of armour and the low murmur of voices just outside your chamber. The sun has barely peeked over the horizon, casting pale light through the narrow window slits, but already the castle is alive with urgency. Your chamberlain enters swiftly, his face drawn and eyes sharp. Your Majesty, the royal physician has arrived. There are concerns about your health. You blink, still heavy with sleep and the weight of yesterday's decisions. My health? What now? It seems, sire, the fever has returned. Your throat is inflamed and the cough persists. You sigh, the familiar ache settling deep into your bones. Medieval medicine is a game of hope and horror, and you've learned to approach it with equal parts skepticism and desperation. Soon enough, the physician arrives, a stooped man with a long beard, sharp eyes, and a satchel full of herbs, knives, and unpronounceable remedies. He examines you, with the practiced detachment of someone used to treating kings who expect miracles, but accept plasters. He listens to your chest, peers down your throat, and mutters about humours and imbalances. Then he reaches into his bag and produces a small jar, filled with a foul-smelling concoction. Apply this to your chest thrice daily, he instructs, and drink this tincture of willow bark. It may ease the fever. You sniff the tincture. It smells like burnt leaves mixed with sadness. Historical fact. Medieval medicine was a curious blend of herbal remedies, superstition, and early science. Leeches, purges, and bloodletting were common treatments, believed to balance the body's humours. Many kings died from infections easily treated today, thanks in part to these methods. As the physician works, you find yourself wondering how you ended up here. A boy crowned king, now a man slowly being undone by an invisible enemy inside his own body. The court buzzes with rumours. Some say you've been cursed. Others whisper that the strain of rulership has finally taken its toll. Fringe tidbit. In some medieval courts, illnesses were blamed on witches or evil spirits. Special rituals were performed to exorcise disease. You, however, prefer the quiet efficiency of a strong broth and hope. Your advisors advise rest. Your servants fuss. You sit wrapped in blankets, clutching a warm cup of herbal tea while your thoughts drift. You think about the arrow from the hunt, the rebellious knight, the endless petitions, and you wonder, if the body can betray you so easily, what hope is there for the kingdom? Outside the castle corridors hum with life. Soldiers drill, nobles whisper, the wheels of state turn, indifferent to your fevered prayers. You close your eyes and imagine the future. A kingdom at peace, a throne passed safely to heirs, a legacy not marred by conflict or disease. But reality is stubborn. A soft knock breaks your reverie. Your mother enters quietly, her eyes full of concern. "Rest, my son," she says softly. "You are the kingdom's heart. Without you, it withers." You nod weakly, letting her words wash over you like a balm. As night falls, the candle flickers low, shadows dancing on the stone walls. You drift into uneasy sleep, caught between duty and fragility, king and man. The castle wakes slowly, filtered sunlight spilling through narrow windows, casting long shadows on the cold stone floors. You rise, stiff, feverish, but determined. Being a king means no rest, even when your body protests like a mule stuck in mud. But today, something feels different. The air is thick with whispers, nervous glances exchanged over goblets, and the unmistakable tension of secrets waiting to unravel. Your chamber door opens, and your trusted chamberlain steps inside, face pale. "Your Majesty, there are troubling reports. Poison is suspected." You blink. Poison? Who? No one knows yet, but the royal cupbearer was found unconscious this morning, clutching his throat. And your wine. It was nearly spilled during last night's feast. You try to laugh, but it sounds hollow. This is the stuff of nightmares, and yet the court whispers it like gossip at market. Paranoia creeps in, sliding beneath your skin like a cold snake. Who can you trust when the people closest to you might be your undoing? The royal physician examines your wine and the cupbearer's belongings, No conclusive proof, just signs of sickness. But rumours spread like wildfire, fanning the flames of suspicion. You're left with two choices: trust blindly and risk betrayal, or doubt everyone and isolate yourself further. You choose caution. Meetings become guarded affairs. Your closest advisors watch each other with hawk eyes. Conversations are clipped, words carefully measured. You overhear whispers of factions forming. Those loyal to you, those eager for your fall. Your own bed feels like a prison. The very walls seem to close in, thick with the weight of unseen threats. Historical fact: poisoning was a feared and real danger in medieval courts. While often exaggerated, several monarchs are believed to have died from deliberate poisoning. Suspicion often fractured alliances and fueled conspiracies. The jester appears one evening, his usual antics subdued. He mutters, "In this court, the deadliest game isn't on the battlefield, it's in the wine." A shiver runs down your spine. Fringe tidbit: some scholars argue that many poisonings were actually misdiagnosed illnesses or political smears. The line between fact and fiction blurs in court intrigue. You order your guards to oversee every meal and drink. Trusted servants are replaced. Spies are planted within your own household. But no security is perfect. One night, you dream of a shadow slipping poison into your goblet. You wake gasping, heart pounding. The next day, you hold council with your most loyal allies, plotting to root out the traitors. Accusations fly, friendships break, and the court fractures. You realize that power is as much a poison as the one you fear. Your reign is becoming a labyrinth of suspicion, where every smile could hide a dagger. You wonder if peace will ever return, or if you'll forever live under the shadow of betrayal. The days blur into weeks, and with each passing moment your kingdom feels less like a realm and more like a chessboard teetering on the edge of collapse. Taxes are due, but the coffers are emptying faster than anyone dares to admit. Nobles grumble behind closed doors and the clergy grows restless, preaching sermons heavy with veiled criticism. You sit in the council chamber rubbing your temples as the treasurer lays out the grim numbers. Grain stores are low, the treasury is drained from war efforts and building projects, and the royal mint is struggling to keep coin flowing. It's a financial storm, and you're the ship's captain navigating blind. Raising taxes seems inevitable, but the consequences? Uncertain and potentially explosive. You weigh your options. Raise taxes too high, and the peasants revolt. Raise them too low, and the army starves. Either way, it's a lose-lose. Your advisors offer conflicting counsel. Some suggest austerity measures, others recommend selling royal lands. The church warns against greed, reminding you of divine justice. Meanwhile, merchants threaten to halt trade unless tolls are reduced. It's a web of conflicting interests, and you're the spider caught in the centre. You draft a proclamation raising the grain tax by a modest margin, promising relief to the poorest. It's met with polite applause in the council, but the murmurs outside the castle tell another story. Historically, tax increases were a flashpoint for unrest. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England began partly over poll taxes deemed unfair. Kings who mismanaged finances risked not just rebellion, but their very throne. You walk through the marketplace, sensing the unease. Peasants eye you with suspicion, merchants whisper curses, and beggars spread rumours like wildfire. You catch fragments of conversations. The king taxes the bones from our tables. We're not slaves to his greed. Fringe historical fact. In some kingdoms, kings were believed to have a spiritual connection to the land. If the crops failed, it was seen as a reflection of the monarch's virtue. Thus, economic hardship could undermine not just rule, but divine right. Your mind circles back to the clergy. They've begun to push harder, calling for repentance and moral reform. Their sermons increasingly hint that your reign is out of favour with heaven. A messenger arrives bearing a letter from the Archbishop, a thinly veiled ultimatum demanding you address corruption and injustice, or face excommunication. You feel the weight of that threat like a physical blow. Excommunication means political isolation, loss of legitimacy, even rebellion, emboldened by religious sanction. You convene an emergency council. The discussion is tense, voices raised, accusations traded. You decide on a partial investigation into corruption among tax collectors and local officials. It's a risky move, too lenient, and you lose the church's favour, too harsh, and you alienate powerful nobles. Meanwhile, rumours swirl that a rival faction is plotting to use the unrest to place a new king on the throne. You know history is filled with such plots, brothers, cousins, and distant nobles eager to seize power amid chaos. Your nights grow restless. You dream of flames engulfing the castle, crowds storming the gates, and your crown shattering on the cold stone floor. You clutch the edges of your bed, whispering a prayer you barely believe, hoping for a miracle, or at least a pause. Because the kingdom demands you stand tall, but you're tired. So very tired. You awake to a morning fog that drapes the castle grounds in ghostly silence. The damp air clings to your skin, making the stone walls even colder than usual. Yet the heaviness pressing down on your chest is not from the chill, but from the burden of a kingdom in unrest. Today you meet with your council of allies, joint ventures, and what you can only call underground allies. Those who, for one reason or another, operate behind the scenes with agendas murky as the moat outside. Your closest partner, Lord Geoffrey, arrives early, bearing news that makes your blood run cold. He whispers of growing unrest in distant provinces, of secret meetings held by nobles you once trusted, and of a merchant guild backing rival claimants to your throne. You feel like you're watching a game of chess being played with pieces made of glass, fragile and easily shattered, yet vital. Your Majesty, Geoffrey says gravely, our enemies gather. We need allies. We need strength. We need strategy. You nod, steeling yourself. Then we build. We recruit. We forge new bonds. The process is painstaking. You send envoys to neighbouring kingdoms, negotiate marriages for your family members, and broker trade deals that promise loyalty and resources. But loyalty is as fickle as the wind. Allies can become enemies overnight. Partners may seek power at your expense. Still, progress is made. You establish networks of spies, encourage mutual defence pacts, and pour funds into your military, aiming for both deterrence and strength. Your joint ventures extend to merchants who provide goods and funding in exchange for favourable trade rights. These underground allies often operate in the shadows, wielding influence through commerce rather than swords. You learn quickly that power is not merely about the sword, but about the web of relationships binding kingdoms, merchants, and nobles. Historical fact: medieval monarchs often relied on marriage alliances, trade agreements, and secret pacts to secure their reigns. The balance of power shifted constantly, demanding shrewd diplomacy. But diplomacy is a delicate dance. One misstep, one misunderstood gesture, and entire alliances could crumble. You recall the story of a king who lost half his realm because he failed to appease a minor lord who held a mountain pass. Sometimes it's not the great battles but the small slights that topple empires. Your nights are filled with parchments, negotiations, and secret meetings. The court becomes a labyrinth of whispers, coded messages, and veiled threats. And all the while, you maintain the public faith. The calm, measured monarch who smiles for portraits, dispenses justice, and attends grand feasts. Yet beneath the veneer, you're exhausted. You dream of a day when alliances won't be needed, when your kingdom stands firm on its own. Until then, you continue to weave your web. The end of your reign creeps closer, not with the fanfare of a grand victory, but with the slow, creeping inevitability of a gout attack after a heavy feast. You find yourself confined more often to chambers than courts, to aches than action. The once fiery ambition that propelled you has dulled, replaced by a weary acceptance. Your kingdom remains a fragile mosaic stitched together with treaties, tax burdens, and tenuous loyalties. You've seen allies betray, enemies grow bolder, and the clergy's patience wear thin. In the quiet moments between council meetings and infirmary visits, you reflect on the legacy you'll leave behind. Some chronicles will paint you as a strong monarch, a king who weathered storms and kept his crown steady. Others will whisper of missteps, of lost battles, both on the field and in the heart. You remember the arrow in the forest, the whispered plots in candlelit chambers, the countless decisions weighed and postponed. Historians will argue for centuries over your reign, whether you were a visionary or a puppet, a warrior or a pawn. But in this fading light, all you want is peace. You dream of a throne passed not with bloodshed but with ceremony, of children playing in gardens you helped build, of harvests plentiful and laws just. The night deepens, your breathing slows, the court's cacophony fades into a distant hum. You close your eyes, the weight of crown and kingdom lifting like a soft breeze. You are, at last, free.